Good morning. KJ7T is in the booth, but today my booth is at my sit-stand workstation. I'm using an Elgato Wave 3 microphone, something I've not used before, so we will see how this goes. This edition of the Random Wire podcast, called Random Wire Reflections, talks about what is coming in issue 98 of the Random Wire Review, publishing this Friday, July 12th at 7 a.m. Pacific. Issue 98 is heavy on All-Star Link because a new beta release is now in the wild. The focus on All-Star Link in issue 98 is on running ASL in a virtual machine and configuring it to work with a SIP phone. I've done those things with ASL too, but there are some interesting wrinkles in getting these working with the ASL 3 beta release. I also describe some of my observations on podcasting, sharing some of the teachable moments I've had so far. An introspective piece on how the Random Wire seems to be evolving is included, and I would appreciate your feedback. A closing note is about some additional functionality for Raspberry Pi single-board computers. All-Star Link on a virtual machine? Well, why not? The big news is ASL3 was released a week ago. W6AWP, one of the ASL community admins, wrote that All-Star Link is proud to announce ASL3, the next generation of All-Star repeater and hotspot software. He goes on to say that ASL3 is built to run on *20, the latest operating systems and modern hardware. *20 brings over 15 years of bug fixes, security improvements, and enhancements. We all know that when a new version of any software is released, many people will want to immediately deploy it in a production environment. That is rarely a good idea. My rule of thumb has been to wait until the first round of bug fixes are published. Another rule of thumb has been to never update or upgrade on a Friday because it rarely goes smoothly and thus screws up an entire weekend. With that cautionary note out of the way, let me share what I did to test ASL3. I know Proxmox is all the rage right now, but for a quick test, I used Oracle's VirtualBox software to create a new virtual machine, or VM. It didn't go smoothly. I started with a minimal installation of Debian 12 as recommended in the new online manual for ASL3. This becomes important later when I figure out why some things aren't working right. They weren't working because they were missing. After installing ASL3 onto the Debian 12 VM, I discovered that the update node service was not running. I had to search for and then install an updated deb file to get that going. And then I found that Almon3 was missing. This was a bit discombobulating because the new manual said that Almon3 and ASL3-update-node list are installed as part of the ASL3 package. That was not my experience. I did reach out to one of the maintainers who acknowledged this was incorrectly stated in the manual, and I saw a few days later that this was corrected in the new online manual. I followed the directions for installing Almon3 on Debian 12, but it didn't work completely right. I could see the Almon3 page and log into it, but it gave me no icons, no colored transmit or receive bar, nothing. I also found that I could not execute commands. I banged my head on the keyboard for a while trying to figure it out. Long story short, I finally set this problem aside and moved on to installing Allscan. The author of the Allscan software, David Gleason, NR9V, very recently modified the installation routine to work with the ASL3 beta. I followed David's instructions and ran into another speed bump. My VM didn't recognize the installation routine when I tried to run it. I realized then that I was probably missing PHP on the machine. Remember that I installed a minimal configuration, and so if packages are needed, you'll probably have to install them. I then installed mlocate and did a search of the VM for PHP files and found relatively few such files were present. That verified for me that PHP was not installed. The latest package I could find was PHP 8.3, so I installed that, and once I did, All scan installed very easily. Another hiccup along the way was with the manager.conf file. Before I installed PHP, I was watching messages in the asterisk command line interface, or CLI. That's where I saw errors about manager.conf not being able to authenticate. I manually changed the user and password, called the secret in manager.conf, to match what I was using for Allmon 3. After restarting asterisk, I saw no more error messages. Now that I had PHP running and my manager.conf problem was resolved, I went back to look at my Allmon 3 instance, and sure enough, it was now working too. As with most of my nodes, I installed some other software. I used Tailscale as the backbone for accessing the node remotely with Windows Remote Desktop Protocol, or RDP. I installed XRDP to give me a remote desktop window on the Debian machine when I RDP to it. I also installed XFCE, a desktop environment, even though the manual said not to. mlocate was installed to give me local search capability on the VM, and of course, I installed UFW, the uncomplicated firewall. My takeaway from hitting these speed bumps is, well, yeah, you can get ASL3 running. I do think it's a tremendous piece of work by the All-Star-Link team. I've been running my virtual node now for several days, and it has not hiccuped once. For me, it is very stable. I think that if you're installing to a Debian 12 platform, it may be best to wait a little while for the installation process to get a little bit smoother. I'm sure there are a large number of people interested in ASL3 on Debian, so it probably won't take very long for this to get better. Once I got ASL3 running smoothly, I thought, well, as long as I'm testing, I may as well connect the node to my Cisco SPA525G phone. I had that connection working with the node I turned off. That node had been running Debian 10 on a Dell Wyse 3040 thin client machine. I did succeed, but it was a bumpy ride. Let me tell you about it. If you want to connect your SIP phone to ASL3, you're going to have to crack open the new online manual. The way SIP connections are made has changed dramatically in ASL3, and the manual has vital guidance on this. I also used some content I had previously published to remind me how SIP connections are supposed to work. First, you modify the /etc/**/modules.conf file. Chan SIP has to be changed from load to no load. Why? Because ASL3 doesn't use Chan SIP. While you're in modules.conf, you'll add a whole new section that loads pjsip and related elements. pjsip replaces Chan SIP. Where I hit a wall was in updating the /etc/**/extensions.conf file. There are some variables in the SIP phones section of extensions.conf, and they did not work as I expected. One stumbling block was the node variable that is set at the top of extensions.conf. My node variable was set to node equals 588411. However, when I was testing connecting to the phone, the node was announcing the node was 300 and the extension was 588411. That was backwards. Eventually, I got this to work by replacing variables with static values. A side-by-side comparison of the recommended configuration and what I actually did are shown in issue 98. By the way, I did find it very helpful to open the asterisk command line interface and monitor what pjsip was seeing. That is where I verified that what I thought to be my node number, pjsip was seeing as my extension, and vice versa. Of course, none of this worked until I configured /etc/**/pjsip.conf per the manual's recommendations. Examples of my working configurations are included in issue 98. And finally, you restart asterisk, cross your fingers, and test. You can use standard DTMF commands to manage connections with other nodes, but I prefer to use AllScan by David Gleason NR9V. AllScan makes connecting to another node very, very easy. And now for some personal observations on podcasting. I used to avoid YouTube videos of people showing others how to do something, and now I don't. I'm finding it easier to find a very focused demonstration of what to do to fix or modify something by simply searching for videos on it. And yet, amateur radio is an audio medium, so I feel a bit more comfortable approaching it from the podcasting side instead of making videos. I suppose there may be times when I want to show something that I can't describe with words or photographs, but that seems unlikely at the moment. First up is, what is your why? Why do you want to do a podcast? It's important to know that because it can be a lot of work. That means time taken from other things you might rather be doing. Do you want to teach? Video might be a better medium. However, audio and the written word can also be used very effectively. Do you want to reach a certain age group? Audio cuts across most demographics, while video and written material seem a bit more segregated when it comes to reaching certain audience segments. Are you comfortable speaking into a microphone? Podcasting might be a great tool, but if you're just as comfortable in front of a camera, video might be the right thing for you. My why was simple. A desire to grow my community by reaching people who would rather listen to audio than read another email. I chose not to use video because A, I'm not very comfortable in front of a camera, and B, video is more difficult to produce, i.e., it is less forgiving. I did not appreciate audio as a medium until my aging mother lost most of her sight. An avid reader all her life, the dimming of her vision was a major blow to her. Audiobooks became a lifeline for her, and as my wife and I were helping to care for her, we listened to some of the books too. I found that I enjoyed hearing content at the narrator's pace instead of at my reading speed. With the frequent long drives involved in my work, audiobooks also became a staple for me. I also wanted to grow my skill at narration, something I've always felt could improve, and how to do that? Well, do more of it. For these reasons, adding an audio component to my newsletter felt like a natural step for me. On the positive side, I get to explore a new medium. This is all new to me, so I get to learn a lot quickly. That's usually a lot of fun for me. I also get to hear feedback that helps me become a better speaker, something I very much want to do. I anticipate that the podcast will allow me to reach more people, and that may equate to some new subscribers, or it might just be a value add for existing subscribers, but that's a positive if it strengthens my subscription base. There are also downsides. Producing audio takes more. It takes more equipment, more effort, and more time. I went looking for information and didn't find much that was clear and unequivocal. And you know why? Because vendors want to sell their products and everyone's situation is different. I'm still at the point where I write a bit of a script for each podcast, and you can hear that in my spoken delivery. It's not where I want to be, but it is where I'm at now. Let's talk about equipment. My point about the lack of clear guidance seemed especially true when it came to selecting microphones. Every source seemed to conflict, and I finally began to recognize that there was no crystal clear right or wrong answer because every situation truly is different. So I did what I usually do. I made mistakes and learned from them. If you have unlimited time and money, go for it. I don't, so I tried to be more judicious and economical in my experimentation. An example is the Blue Yeti Nano microphone. I have a Yeti microphone that I picked up at a thrift store, but the thing is huge on my small desk. It just takes up too much space. I liked the sound it captured, but not how much real estate it consumed. Some people like the Blue Yeti Nano, and some detest it, just like many microphones. Still, it wasn't much money to try the Nano, and I'm finding it to be a hot little mic. Therein lies one of the downsides of the Nano. It tends to pick up more than I want it to. It picks up more because it's a condenser microphone. It would benefit from being in a more controlled environment. I don't have a sound studio, nor do I have space to create one. I might love it more if I had quiet space, but I don't. I also tried some dynamic microphones. They're less sensitive, and so they may be better in places where there are background sounds you don't want heard by the mic. My first episode was using a dynamic mic. My second episode was with the condenser mic. The third episode, I spoke directly into a Zoom H4n Pro portable recorder, but I spoke across the mic instead of directly into it, and then used some post-recording processing to bring the audio level up a bit. As you can see, this is still an active area of experimentation for me. Once I settle on a few approaches, I can spend more on a better microphone as my daily driver. By the way, I fell down this rabbit hole because I was looking for a desk microphone I could use with my FTM 300 radio that I'm using on my desk as a portable digital node over Wires X. There were no obvious choices, and so I started to learn about kinds of microphones and which ones might work with my radio. Along the way, I discovered that even some worldwide microphone vendors were a little mixed up about what might work with the FTM 300. So what will you record into? I'm recording into my computer. Any day now, I'll start recording through the computer to an external drive in order to save storage space. I also have a Zoom 4HN Pro portable recorder, and I'm excited to experiment with it. I took it out for the first time on field day this year and got some audio clips, despite making every mistake you could possibly think of. And by the way, this is the way I learn. Break it, make mistakes, fix it, try it again, rinse and repeat. So, where will you host your podcast? This topic could easily consume an entire newsletter. I looked at many options over a few months and finally decided to keep it as simple as I could. Since Substack, the service that hosts the Random Wire newsletter, also offered podcast hosting, I chose to host at Substack. There are, of course, pluses and minuses to this, but so far it's working okay. You can find free podcast hosting and paid podcast hosting. I lean toward paid because the free versions often limit how much you can host, how long they'll keep your podcast episodes online, and may include advertising of their choice in your podcast. Paid hosting tends to give you more control, more time, and fewer or no ads. But there is more, a whole lot more. Having your podcast hosted in one place doesn't get your podcast out there. You need to distribute your podcast, as in have others carry it. I'm using Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, and Pocket Casts as my distribution channels. And then there is promoting your podcast. You have a choice, of course. Promote it or not. Promotion means spreading the word. I'm using Facebook a little bit, but mainly depending on my Random Wire newsletter subscribers to increase my podcast listeners. I do have multiple social media accounts, but I'm trying to stay away from those tools because I find some folks in social media tend to react and speak out without really thinking about what they're saying. I don't really want a subscriber base that goes up and down a lot. I want subscribers willing to travel this train with me. Do make sure your amateur radio club knows you have a podcast. That's a great way to reach people who might not be able to attend club meetings. The spoken word connects with people in a way that the written word cannot. That's important, particularly when we have so many in our community who need those connections. If your local school has a ham radio club or a STEM program, that's STEM for science, technology, engineering, and math, it may not hurt to let them know you have a podcast. That gives the club advisor or a teacher the opportunity to review your material and consider using it in some lessons. You might even get invited to present a topic, and there are few better feelings than helping people learn about amateur radio. Okay, that is enough. That was a shallow dive, but if you've not thought about these topics before, it probably felt rather deep. Let's call it deep enough and move on to another topic. This is the introspective piece about the evolution of the random wire. If you've been with the Random Wire for a while, you've probably noticed that topics can be a bit, random. I started this writing experience by journaling, and then I started writing a run book, that's an information technology term, for my various radio platforms. A run book, in non-technical terms, is a collection of how-to recipes for common tasks. In my case, I wanted to document some of the tasks I found myself engaged in, things like installing All-Star Link on a Dell Wise 3040 thin client machine, upgrading Debian on an ASL node, extending a node number, and more. That's right. For me, this all started with All-Star Link. Along this 2-year journey, my subscriber numbers grew pretty steadily. Meanwhile, my topics rambled along on a bit of a random walk, covering old gear, new equipment, making some deeper dives into digital modes, and resurfacing a few times on other topics, sometimes with actual RF-based radios. It's been a bit of a dog's breakfast in my view. I'm not entirely happy with that, but at the same time, I've come to realize that a lot of hams are similar to me in that they have wide-ranging interests that are hard to capture in a discrete set of topics contained in a tightly focused, targeted newsletter. To this day, the Random Wire newsletter remains a somewhat messy collection of topics and observations. Subscribers are great, but there are 2 problems with subscribers. First is not having any, and second is getting caught up in the subscriber numbers game. When you start a blog or a newsletter, you are alone. You write the very first post and publish it, and then nothing happens. It takes other people, it takes partnerships and mutual support, it takes connecting with real humans to grow your subscriber base. But there's an inflection point in this process because you start to watch the subscriber numbers change with each issue, and the watching ends up influencing what you choose to write about. I'm trying not to do that. I'm trying to keep it all a bit messy and rambling, true to the title, The Random Wire. I'm thrilled to have more than 950 subscribers following my work. I'm actually astounded by this number. When I started, I thought maybe my little niche in our huge amateur radio universe might capture the interest of 100 or maybe 200 hams, but it is growing beyond anything I expected. Color me continually surprised. I've been told my writing exhausts people, as in, Tom, there's too much detail. I've been told I'm not writing about real radio, meaning the content isn't appealing to some folks. I've been told my topics have no order, and to that I say, true, I'm a mess just like many of my radio friends are. But as noted, subscribers do influence content and style. In response, I've written summaries instead of detailed recipes. Feedback, not enough detail. I rolled in a bit more about real radio, only to hear from some that this wasn't the content they wanted. I've tried to organize a bit better by at least having a table of contents in each issue, and the feedback on that change has been, silence. And yet, I feel the Random Wire evolving. It is certainly growing, but as I look back on the nearly 100 publications in 2 years, I see the content beginning to intersect more and more about radio and technology, where technology often means computers, routers, networking, etc. A confluence of big topics opens up an even wider universe of things to write about. I'd really like to stay anchored in amateur radio, but I feel some pull toward ideas and products that are outside that limited realm. I'm grappling with this tension as I think about the Random Wire over the summer. Should I give in and expand my topics, or should I try to stay more focused on my admittedly messy, random ideas and activities about amateur radio and tech? I'm more comfortable not changing, but at the same time, I do want to expand my knowledge and interests. I truly do not know where this will lead. It's a rambling journey, not a destination. Let me also address paid subscriptions. I just don't see that for the Random Wire, partly because my content is a jumble of ideas and partly because I want content to be free. I remember being an early amateur radio licensee and having that awful epiphany that everything cost more than I could afford. I lean more toward helping people get involved with amateur radio and trying some things that are new to them, rather than dwelling on detailed analyses of circuits and antennas. The Random Wire, when it speaks to me, says, I need to be free to people. At the same time, I'm spending a lot of time planning, buying equipment, writing about it, and thinking about what to capture next. It becomes a bit costly, and so I now include affiliate links on my support page as a no-obligation way to generate some revenue from this work. It's not intended to provide much, but every little bit helps with internet costs, website hosting, recording equipment, and amateur radio gear. It is always a humbling moment when I see that someone has bought me a coffee or purchased a product using one of my affiliate links, and I thank you. So the content has been changing a bit over time, and there are completely optional ways to provide some financial support if you wish. Another evolution is the addition of a podcast, which has been and continues to be quite an adventure. I have to say that creating a new podcast from scratch is an order of magnitude jump up from writing a blog or a newsletter. It takes more equipment, more time, more thought. The time required for editing is greater than you might imagine. I've started my podcasting journey at the smallest and simplest level that I thought might yield good quality audio results. This is unnerving work for me. I'm stepping outside my comfort zone to try to become more comfortable with the process of verbalizing ideas in front of hundreds of other people. Have you seen hams that can't quite bring themselves to make that first CQ call? That's the kind of reticence I feel in front of the podcasting microphone. I'm exercising that weakness to become more capable at this. Just as with the written word, I really don't know where the spoken word is going to go. I'd like to do some interviews. I plan to capture sound clips of various modes so people can hear what different modes sound like. I want to get clips of some of the best practices I hear on the radio and clips of some of the worst, without embarrassing the people speaking. I hope the podcast evolves in this direction. All this is to say, I started without a plan, and I still don't have a plan other than to enjoy my journey in amateur radio, learn as much as I can, and share what I'm learning with others. Your time is precious. So is mine. I don't plan to write or record on things that have little value, but I'm sure I will. Along the way, I'm also certain we'll find topics where our interests overlap. I am very glad you're on this journey with me, and I hope you'll have a good time on the Random Wire train. Next stop, unknown. Do feel free to leave a comment or contact me directly with your feedback. I value all feedback. And in the final notes, as long as I'm dwelling on tech in issue 98, there is interesting news about the Raspberry Pi single-board computers that came to light a few weeks ago. I include links at the end of issue 98. And with that, I'll say thank you to all subscribers. I do very much appreciate you taking this journey with me. 73 to all. This is KJ7T, and I'm clear.